The first recipient of the Medal of Honor was Jacob Wilson Parrott, who was given his award on March 25, 1863, by Secretary of War Edward M. Stanton for his daring exploits as a member of Andrews's raiders on the Great Locomotive Chase mission, also known as Andrews's Raid, on April 12, 1862, during the American Civil War, fought between the Union in the North and the Confederacy in the South between 1861 and 1865. Jacob Wilson Parrott was born on July 17, 1843, in Fairfield County, Ohio. After war broke out in April 1861, primarily over the question of the enslavement of black people, Parrott soon joined the 33rd Ohio Infantry, Company K. The unit was commanded by Colonel Joshua Sill. The colonel was later killed in the Battle of Stones River on December 31, 1862. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, was named after him. He was replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Oscar Moore, a U.S. representative from Ohio. The 33rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Unit was active throughout the Civil War and lost a total of 332 men. From its ranks, as we will learn, 7 enlisted men were awarded the Medal of Honor after the Great Locomotive Chase. The Great Locomotive Chase had its origins in a plan formulated by Major General Mitchell to isolate and capture Confederate-held Chattanooga and thereby shrink the northern and western boundaries of the Confederate advance. Crucial to his plan was cutting off rail access to Chattanooga, which would prevent reinforcements and supplies entering the area. Enter James J. Andrews. Andrews was a civilian, operating as a scout and a spy for the Union. Andrews was born in Virginia and moved to Kentucky later to find work. When war broke out, he smuggled contraband goods between the hostile lines. In April 1862, he approached General Mitchell with a daring plan to capture a locomotive in northern Georgia and drive it to Chattanooga, causing mayhem and damage along the way to the rail line, bridges, telegraph wires, and track switches. At Chattanooga, he and his command would rendezvous with advancing Union troops, who would occupy the area and oust the Confederate forces, who would be unable to receive reinforcements or supplies. Thus was born the plan for what would become known as the Great Locomotive Chase, or Andrews's Raid. The raiders, led by Andrews, comprised another civilian, William Bill Campbell, and 22 volunteers from 3 different Ohio infantry regiments, including Jacob Wilson Parrott. The raid was scheduled for April the 11th, but poor weather delayed the operation. The volunteers were ordered to don civilian clothing and make their way in small groups to Marietta, Georgia, by midnight on April the 10th, where they would unite and capture a train the following day. Heavy rain caused a delay, but on April the 12th, Andrews's raiders were in position. Both civilians, Andrews and Campbell, made it to the rendezvous. 2 of the soldiers didn't make it in time, Samuel Llewellyn and James Smith, while 2 others, Martin Jones Hawkins and John Reed Porter, were in the vicinity but missed the heist, reportedly because they overslept. Thus, of the original 24, 20 actually took control of the locomotive and headed north to Chattanooga. In considering the location for the capture of a locomotive, Andrews selected Big Shanty, Georgia, north of Atlanta, primarily because he believed the town had no telegraph office, and that this would therefore cause a delay in communicating the heist. When the train stopped to allow passengers to disembark for breakfast, he and his men would strike. The capture of the locomotive, the General, was successful, and immediately the raiders set off towards Chattanooga, pursued by the train's conductor, William Allen Fuller, and 2 others. Fuller initially gave chase on foot, before being able to commandeer a handcar. Fuller's task may have seemed impossible, but the speed of the locomotives at that time was, on average, around 15 miles per hour or 24 kilometers per hour, and this would be reduced while traveling over hilly terrain. Andrews faced a further problem in that he had to keep to the regular timetable so as to enable southbound trains to pass him on the single track while he waited in sidings. It was no good to simply speed off, as this would result in a collision somewhere further ahead. In addition to this, there was also the desire not to arouse undue suspicion along the way. Station masters were told that the train was carrying ammunition north to the forces in Chattanooga, a story that was accepted, thanks in large part to Andrews cutting the telegraph wires to the south as he passed by to prevent communication. These acts of sabotage were also time-consuming and allowed for the chance of a successful pursuit. Early in the chase, Andrews passed a locomotive, the Yonah, at Etowah, waiting in a siding. He faced a dilemma. Should he continue his journey north with all haste, or take the time to stop and disable the older, smaller train? Stopping could result in a possible fight with the work party around the Yonah, which could alert any nearby troops. Continuing and leaving the Yonah intact could give any pursuers the best chance of catching his raiding party. In the end, Andrews decided to pass the stationary locomotive and continue on his way as fast as he could. His task was to do as much damage as possible to the track and delay Confederate reinforcements, and he kept this as his priority. The second unanticipated obstacle to the success of his mission faced Andrews at Kingston. Trains were heading south along the single track, and the general became delayed at Kingston Junction. As a freight train moved south, Andrews spotted a red flag tied to its rear. Asking about the meaning of it, he was told the disheartening news that it warned that a second locomotive was coming up behind, and that it had the right of way. By now, the Confederate forces in Chattanooga were alerted to Mitchell's advance on their positions from Stevenson, Alabama, and increased rail traffic was being sent south to pick up men and material for the coming battle. Exasperated, but still maintaining his cover, Andrews had no choice but to wait, and wait he did. For an hour he and his party sat idle, while Fuller closed the distance between them. Unknown to the commander of the raiders, Fuller had commanded the Yonah at Etowah, and had been able to make up a lot of distance. When the general finally pulled out of Kingston Junction, it was only marginally ahead of the pursuit party. Again, unknown to Andrews, his chances of escape took a further turn for the worse when, at Kingston, Fuller was able to swap the less powerful Yonah for the faster William R. Smith locomotive. The chase was back on. It was Fuller, though, whose efforts were next thwarted. 2 miles south of Adairsville, Andrews had successfully lifted sections of the track, thereby preventing immediate pursuit. Helpless, the conductor fumed, but was forced to leave his engine and continue again on foot, knowing that with each passing minute, the general was pulling further and further ahead. As Chattanooga drew closer, Andrews faced a new problem at Calhoun. Steaming south was the Texas, pulling 12 cars. Bluffing quickly, he persuaded the crew of the locomotive to vacate the single track, moving into the siding, so that the general may continue on its way north. Successfully done, the raiders now knew with certainty that a second train would be available to anyone still pursuing them. Time was running out. Indeed, after Fuller was able to commandeer the Texas, he uncoupled the cars and put the locomotive into reverse, only stopping at Calhoun again to pick up a small detachment of 11 soldiers. Andrews again faced a dilemma. Stopping to destroy the track or attempting to burn a bridge was a massive risk. It was possible that any pause would result in he and his men being captured before any delaying action could be completed. None of the Union soldiers with him were skilled engineers, nor did they have the proper equipment. Due to the recent poor weather, the wooden bridges would not burn. All he could do was stop periodically to cut the telegraph wires, but each break in the journey saw Fuller pull closer. Dalton passed by, and, a short ways north, Andrews ordered a stop to sabotage the communications once more. It was moments too late. Fuller, just a short distance away, had stopped in Dalton and had been able to send a message ahead to Chattanooga, warning of the renegade locomotive approaching from the south. Oblivious, the plot of Andrews and his raiders was now undone. I will continue the story of Jacob Wilson Parrott, his comrades, and the Great Locomotive Chase in the next video. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. All your help is much appreciated. Also, please check out my sister YouTube channel as well, The Victoria Cross, highlighting the brave servicemen who have fought for and won Britain's highest military honour for bravery.